U.S. Supreme Court a couple of times, not just to visit and get something to stick on my wall, but actual cases, which is very unusual if you're a civil lawyer. In other words, if I was a defense lawyer, it would be expected that I would go to the Supreme Court on appeal, criminal issues. Was the search proper? Blah, blah, blah. Did you read the Miranda rights? Blah, blah, blah. That's old hat for me. I've represented murderers, more than one. I've been in prisons. I meant to visit. Actually, I've been in prisons, arrested. I'll tell you about that maybe if I remember in my bio. I'll try to do it chronologically so I can remember. But in case I forget, because I'm 85, I was arrested in Cuba. No, not by Fidel Castro, but by Firenze, or whatever his first name was, Batista. He was the dictator just before Castro took over. In 1958, the spring of 1958, I was a college newspaperman. I was arrested, thrown in prison, kept a couple days, almost shot by a Thompson submachine gun that was up against my ribs, and taken to jail at something called Moncado Barracks in Santiago, 350 miles from Havana. Right next to the Guantanamo naval base of the United States. We haven't given that land up. It's not our land in a fundamental sense, but it's land. And we probably see I've got an incoming email. This is just Action Jackson, right during the day of a lawyer. Hopefully the phone doesn't go off. Measures, but not everything works according to plan. The best laid plans of mice and men oft go astray. Let's start in the beginning. You're entitled to know who I am, and otherwise, I don't like to talk about myself. I'll try to make this factual with no embellishment. I was born in 1936, September 10th, in a city called Kalamazoo, which is on I-94 between, roughly midway between Detroit and Chicago. It's 150 miles each way. If you go to Detroit, 150 miles. Go to Chicago, 150 miles. So who did I root for? The Detroit Chicago White Sox. Those are American League clubs. It depended on who was winning, standing high in the standings. I was a Dutch boy. The last name Elsman, E-L-S-M-A-N, is Dutch because my grandfather, as I remember him, was born in the Netherlands. Nobody knows much about what the Netherlands is, but they speak a separate language. And it's somewhat like German. I have a Bible that translates at least the book of Luke, and I can read it in English, I just did it this morning. I can read it in French, I can read it in German, and I can read it in Dutch on just one opening. That's what I read. The Prodigal Son, chapter 10 of Luke, I think. I actually have lots of Bibles in my law office, and I don't like to put out any false information. So let's just check to see if Luke 10 has to do with the prodigal son, which is a great story. We're not going to do it today because, nope, I was wrong. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. The guy that is not a Jew, and he binds up the wounds of a man found wounded. By the way, the prodigal son is probably Luke 15. So I can at least give you an accurate. Yeah, it calls it the parable of the lost son, Luke 15. Remember the one son that goes away and he's eating with the pigs and repents and comes back to see his father, and his father receives him. And his older brother gets jealous. He says, "Hey, I've been loyal to my father. I haven't gone off and become a drunk and involved with women. And you're honoring the son that was lost." We'll get into stories like that. Sometimes they're representative of Jesus because they're told by Jesus and how loving his heart is. Okay, we got me born. My mother was a kind of a mixed breed, Indian partly. This has not been confirmed by Ancestry, but I've got an Ancestry package at home I've got to fill out. And I'm anxious to find out. Many people think that I have Jewish blood in me because I'm kind of a lawyer, bald head, and a name that can pass, Elsman. And my profession, a lawyer. So my mother had Pennsylvania Dutch. I guess it was German. It was never, nor was I greatly curious. I was born that way. I couldn't reverse it. I had to live with it. Well, I told you I tried to turn off the phones, but let's try. Busy. Thank you. Hello. I'm busy. I hope he understood. It may ring again. Okay. I can't remember my early life. I was a baby. But at 5, I do remember. Maybe I remember a few bumps and bruises because I slipped and cut my head open, the normal childhood type of stuff. But at 5, think of what I saw. You who know history, I saw Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Didn't see him, I'm sorry. I heard him say something like, "This is a day of infamy. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor." I was alive. I'm that old. You can see the white beard. December 7th, 1941. This 5-year-old was traumatized. because I thought my father, who had 7 children, would be going off to war. And I didn't know how he would be fed and clothed and housed without my dad. You know, he was as important as my mom. Speaking of my dad, he was a salesman. Kind of a death of a salesman type, because in the first part of his career, he got fired and ultimately went on to build a restaurant and a coin laundromat. And that was a blessing to him. He died a happy man. And my wife, his wife, was happy too. My parents didn't get divorced. They stuck it out, battled it out, had 7 children. I'm the oldest. And here's a little bit of a sad fact, although I speak against my own interest. I'm the only one alive. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I was the oldest, and they have all deceased. I've held a couple of them in my arms, and they've repented to Jesus for their sins, and I'm convinced I'll see them in heaven because Jesus is that merciful. So they led rough lives. Whose life isn't ups and downs? And you see people on television, and you know people. It appears they're happy. It appears nothing bad ever happens to them, but believe me, there's a lot going on in life. Behind the bedroom doors, behind the front door, everybody has suffered pain, trauma. If not to them directly, the mental disappointment about life. But I'm full of joy. First chapter of James, my own name, says, count it all joy, even when you face temptations and setbacks. I believe that. You got to keep hacking, because God is a loving God and he doesn't want you to suffer. All right, let's get back to the chronology. I don't have to tell you how all of my 6 brothers and sisters died. It's painful. At 7, remember at 5, the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor. Imperial Japan was defeated along with Hitler. So I lived during that period. I had a machine gun at home, which was just a rounded, well, let's call it a toilet paper roll. My dad built it into a machine gun for me, and I was always shooting Japs and Germans. Well, today I love Japs and Germans. They build good cars, very competitive. And I had good relations with my brothers and sisters. Those were happy days. We were not a rich family. I said my dad was kind of a Arthur Miller, Willie Loman character, Death of a Salesman. But in the last part of his life, he had that restaurant. And we used to gather there at Thanksgiving, and we had a lot of fun. My sister was pregnant at 15, and that was a big impact. My paper route prospered, but when I was 17, I was ready for college, and I went to a private school. at Western Michigan University called Western State High. I thought I would be an athlete because I was recruited as an athlete. But my body didn't grow too fast in those days. So I was always kind of a little skinny kid. And I tried to make the tennis team, but the coach said, nope, I don't take anybody that has not matriculated through kindergarten through 9th grade, 10th grade. Too bad, Elsman. You've been practicing all winter in the squash courts in the handball courts of Western Michigan, but I'm not taking you, even if you can beat somebody on my team. So that was a great disappointment. But as you will learn, I went on to tennis fame or infamy. So Paperboy goes to the University of Michigan. That was a trip that took me 100 miles away from my home. So I had to give my paper route to my brothers and sisters, which was very painful because mom and dad said, you got to give it. And if you haven't collected money from your route customers, it's going to fall into the pockets of your brothers and sisters that inherit the route. So I was out there hustling to collect that money. You betcha. And I was kind of a lazy paperboy because at the end, I didn't do any peddling. I just did the collections for about 300 customers in my small town called Parchment. Yeah, we made paper. Parchment. They don't even make it there anymore. That's how fast the economy changes and little towns get hurt. There were only 800 people in my town. Parchment. It was owned by a man named Kindleberger who owned the paper mill. He owned the church building. My dad never went to church because he didn't like to have a company town controlling his religion, which is pretty profound thought, but that's the way it was. And when I was in junior high and whatever, life was much different. We could talk about Jesus at auditoriums, at Christmas, Easter. There were no restrictions like that. I never met a gay person. LGBTQ. It didn't exist. It did not exist. Where did they come up with that? So I'm at the University of Michigan. First semester, I think I'm going to flunk out. It was too tough. I was successful in high school, but it was a private school and I hadn't been there K through 10. So I just got there 10 through the 12th grade. And I was kind of a social loser from a small town, recruited as an athlete. I failed as an athlete. And I was discovered by teachers. They said, you're brilliant. They were wrong, but you're brilliant. You can write. I wrote about love affairs and all kinds of things that boys did. And some of these teachers, they got excited. That's the truth. They liked to read something that was exciting to them. And I took tough stuff, even though I was just a country kid kind of compared to the other people that went to my high school, the sons of doctors and lawyers and rich people in Kalamazoo. Somehow I made it through high school, discovered by teachers, and got a full, we call it Regent Scholarship to the University of Michigan. And again, I had to be discovered after almost flunking out. Tough freshman year, but I did so well in English and writing that I got to skip the second semester and took optional courses like speech and so forth. And as I looked at the world in college, saw football games in the nation's largest stadium, I think it's now 111,000 can gather in Michigan Stadium. That was my school. And I went to those games. Tickets were free then. You have to pay for them now. And I looked at the world and I saw the biggest country. It was China. In terms of population. But I looked at the map and I saw the biggest country in terms of geography, space, 11 time zones, Russia. So I was just a simple guy and I said, I'm going to study Russian and I'm going to study Chinese. And that's what I did. I could talk to you right now in Russian. You want some Russian? Вы говорите по-русски? I'm just asking you if you speak Russian. Do you speak Russian? You want it in Chinese? 你说不说中国话吗? Do you speak Chinese? 中国. They have one symbol. It means the middle of the world, the middle kingdom. That's how they think of themselves. So we have to keep that in mind as we sit here in 2022. That's our real competitor for the future. Not Russia, as it would appear today, because we're obsessed with Ukraine. And we should be. Pray constantly that that war get over and the peace treaty achieved. And the parties, as bargaining goes, as a lawyer would tell you, everybody gets a little and gives a little. So people go away a little bit happy and a little bit disappointed. That's a deal. All right, we're back at the University of Michigan. One day I decide I'm going to try out for the news. And God's hand is on me. In 1956, Russia attacked Hungary. Still remember it. It was very tense. We didn't know what we'd do. I mean, Russia was in the hands of Stalin then, remember? And atomic bombs, now hydrogen bombs, were a big topic. People actually built bomb shelters. And we were up against Stalin, who had beat the Germans. Of course, we gave him some Lend-Lease and other equipment, but I'm telling you, the Russians really suffered loss, maybe 50 million. Whew. Those are rough days. The U.S. never suffered quite proportionally as much. I mean, I didn't ever miss a meal. I remember doing things like getting milk pods so that we could put them in life jackets. I still don't understand it, but somehow they helped in flotation. And of course, gathering tin cans, you got ration stamps. You could only buy so much meat and milk and whatever. So I had a few years under my belt of experience, even in high school. And in college, I was a poor boy from a relatively poor family because we had 7 kids. And that newspaper job made me a big man on campus. I was invited, even though I was stripped naked by some outfit called the Druids. These were kind of mystical societies. I don't believe in that personally, but I didn't have a choice. They dragged me out of bed, stripped me naked at midnight, and in front of a dormitory that I was in with maybe 1,000 boys, built a bonfire and did whatever they did, secret society as it was. I became a big man on campus. Why? Because I covered the Hungarian Revolution of '56. A family had escaped from Hungary and come to the United States. I interviewed them. My editors splashed it on the front page, and I was on my way. I ended up my newspaper career, to speed this up a little bit, by going to Little Rock Central High in the fall of '57. That's when Eisenhower integrated the first Southern school with troops. Those were the days when Governor Faubus and whoever these Southern governors were standing in the schoolhouse door. They weren't going to permit integration, which had been ordered by the Supreme Court. Eisenhower didn't mess around. He sent either the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Airborne to surround that school. Well, I snuck right through them. I got a girl that was going to the school to lend me her library card. That's what you showed to these bayonets surrounding the school. I got inside after showing my library card and took a picture of 9 black students. His name was Jefferson Thomas, just the opposite of Thomas Jefferson. And I sold that to Time Life for $200, and it paid for my whole trip. I'd never been on an airplane before. I was such a hick, but that covered my expenses. I think I actually took a train down to Kansas City, and I said, this is too slow and news is breaking. I went right to the airport in Kansas City and flew the rest of the way to Little Rock, Arkansas. Prop. I didn't have jets in those days. And the next spring, we got another year here, of '58, everybody was going to Fort Lauderdale for spring vacation. Get drunk, walk around the blah, blah. That wasn't for me. I talked a young cub reporter into trying to go to Cuba. Well, we met a guy at a bar. We weren't drinking. We're too young to drink. He was going to be rolled. We called it rolled in those days. Rolled by some prostitutes. We grabbed him. We said, buddy, get out of here. We're going to put you in a cab. He asked us to go in the cab with him. And he handed us a wad of money. Turned out to be $300 or something like that. They paid for our complete Cuban trip. We didn't go by passenger plane because, for one thing, it's only like 90 miles from the tip of Florida, Cuba. So we're the big spies. Castro has called a general strike from the mountains where he is. And Cuba is tense. Batista's got troops all over the place. And so here we come in, trying to pretend we're tourists, but we're just college kids. And Batista's secret police is on us quick. We don't know it, but that's what we learn later. We go to 3 places: a rum distillery, run a Cadillac limousine for the whole day for $10. Rum distillery, the Copacabana nightclub, and house of prostitution. My buddy, I always tell the story this way. He tells it the opposite. My buddy goes up with one of the girls and gets an address down in Santiago where Castro is up in the mountains. And we fly the next day. It's Easter Sunday. Well, all the other college students are playing on the beaches of Fort Lauderdale. I'm trying to get a scoop in the mountains of Santiago. You can look at a map. It's 350 miles from Havana. Cuba's a long island. It's not too thick, but it's long. Well, we're only in our hotel, asking around on the streets, do you know this address, blah, blah, blah. And there's a knock at the door. A Thompson submachine gun comes in first, and we're under arrest. We're taken in a Jeep with all of our bags. We didn't have any bags. We were just teenage kids. To Moncado Barracks. It's right next to Guantanamo Bay. Actually, Batista had Castro incarcerated in Moncado Barracks at one time and let him go. Great mistake, but that's history for you. There are strange turns. Before we go into the Jeep to be taken to Moncado Barracks, we meet a guy from Shell Oil. Shell was the outfit that put fuel into the boats that come into Guantanamo, American naval boats, destroyers, carriers, whatever. And he says, you guys are in big trouble. Sing American songs, make sure they know you're Americans. You probably won't be killed. Well, our hearts started pumping a little then. But we did as he said, and he said, I will contact the American consul in Havana if we don't have one here in Santiago. And that's how we got out after 2 days of sleeping on cement. In the jail cell next to us, there was a typewriter and a drain where they actually shot in the head people that typed out a confession, and the drain was there to take the blood away. That's pretty tough. That was a close call. So that's my college day. I think the only other near-death experience besides just driving on the highways every day, having a couple of accidents, was when I was down in the swamps of Florida hunting all by myself. And I was under the impression that there were only two snakes that could kill you: a coral snake and a rattlesnake. Nobody ever told me about a moccasin. So I'm driving down this road. I see this huge snake. I said, it's just a black snake. but it'll make a great photograph. So I had a video cam, and I chased it into the sawgrass, and there it is all curled up. And it yawns at me like that, opens its mouth, and its mouth is all white, but that doesn't mean anything to me. I get right down for a picture. The next day, I'm out with a guy that's showing me land. I always had an interest in buying cheap Florida land, and maybe it amount to something someday. And Florida is a great vacation spot for Michigan people. I had condos in Naples. So the next day, when I'm with this realtor with a Florida name, Wade Colding, Colding, in a town called Immokalee, he says, Jim, you were only 2 minutes from death. I said, Wade, how do you know that? He said, well, the way you describe it to me, that was a water moccasin. And they're lethal. They'll come right after you in the water. We were more afraid of them when I was a boy growing up. We used to go into ponds and walk on the top of gators. We weren't afraid of them. They'd wrestle with you in the water or something like that, but they didn't eat you right away. They stored you in a little hole down there if they could. We did it just for fun. He said, the way we can prove this one way or the other is for me to take a look at your video cam. I showed him my video cam. You reverse it and you look at the film. He said, Jim, it's true. That's a water moccasin. So praise the Lord. I survived. All right. So that was a little diversion. But eventually, after Michigan undergrad, where I studied Russian and Chinese, I've got to think eventually about making a living. If I get married, feeding a family. And I'm excited about law school. I let that go. They'll call back. Let's just see who it is. Law offices. Call back. Hey, when you get to be 85, you don't worry about missing a client. Where were we? Yeah, I was thinking about law school, but Jesus was interesting me more and more. I had some Methodist Sunday school background when I was growing up in this little town, Parchment. And somebody one day offered me a full ride to any divinity school I wanted. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, University of Chicago, or I could have gone out to the West Coast, any school. But those were the big ones, the ones I mentioned at that time with the professors who knew everything about Jesus. I was interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Keep in mind, this is about 1959. They were a hot topic. Some scrolls of Isaiah had been found in what we call the Qumran caves in Israel by some sheep herders that just happened upon them. There were some pots. They broke open the pots and found these scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Harvard had the best scholars, Frank Cross and G. Ernest Wright. So since I had a full ride to any school of my choice on a Rockefeller scholarship, I took it. The Rockefeller scholarship was unique, only given to guys. Girls didn't get scholarships back in those days. Ministers were presumed to be male. Push. Those were the days. Only given to men who did not want to go into the ministry. In other words, the Rockefeller family, especially the old man, they were serious Christians, Baptists. And if they gave you a free year, 2/3 of the time they won their bet and you changed your mind and you went into full-time ministry. Not necessarily pulpit, but could be a professor at a university or something like that, teaching Bible. It was enough for me, and I told them they were going to lose their bet because they said, that's exactly the type of guy we want. We take somebody that's headed for the major professions, law, medicine, engineering, business, and we convert them to a new career path. They lost their bet. I took my Rockefeller scholarship and studied under Frank Cross and G. Ernest Wright. They were in turn taught by Albright at Johns Hopkins. Now, that doesn't mean anything to 99% of you, but that's at least who I studied under. They were the experts in the United States on the Dead Sea Scrolls. You have to be able to read Hebrew on texts that are broken up and old, 2,000 years old. So that's my Harvard experience. And I should add, Harvard at that time had the leading theologian by reputation, not in truth. The guy was kind of a baloney artist, frankly. But I took his class. Paul Tillich, Tillich. He was a liberal. I don't know if he really believed in the Bible. In his latter days, he was contemplating his navel up on a rooftop naked. I mean, I was awed. I was very naive. I was awed by his reputation. Liberation theology. In other words, down in Latin America and other places, was dominant, but nobody believed anything important. People just went through form and not substance. And in America as well, and in Europe as well. At Harvard, I dated some girls over at whatever those girls' schools are around Boston. Plenty of them. We were normal boys. We played football, touch football. I had a roommate. I intercepted a pass that was meant for him once, and he never forgave me. And I was starting to correspond with this friend at the University of Michigan. I loved her. It was exciting to get a letter from her. And before my Harvard career ended, she came out and I engaged her. Yep. Took her to Marblehead, which is some city on the coast of Massachusetts, kind of an art colony city. I bought her an orange duck meal, and that was my best play. And I gave her some cheap engagement ring from Sears and Roebuck. That's all I could afford. I'm embarrassed to say that, but she knows it. And I'm not hiding anything. Okay, what was I going to do after Harvard? University of Michigan Law School. I was a big man on campus, so it wasn't hard to get into University of Michigan Law School, but I had to survive. What's there? Freshman year, again, I don't do well in the beginning. I think I'm flunking out. I'm working hard. I'm a year from getting married to Janice Marie Wilczewski, a good Polish girl on both sides. Her mother's an Osinski, her father's a Wilczewski. He's a maintenance man at a chemical company called Wyandotte, which has since been bought by the Germans. Bayer, like Bayer aspirin. And we were in love. Got married in 1960. So it's easy to calculate how long you've been married. I don't want to jump ahead, but it's 61 years. Most of you out there aren't even 61 years old. I've been married 61 years. Woo! I'll get to the children later and the grandchildren. So hard. Law school. University of Michigan. I'm back on the campus where I didn't want to stay. Undergrad plus law school, 7 straight years on the same campus. Forget it. Harvard was a year in the wilderness to think about how I could make Jesus happy. And I didn't leave Harvard saying I'm not going to serve Jesus. There are different ways to serve Jesus. Not everybody's a minister. Let's show you how to get rid of people. Law offices. No, I'm busy. Call back. Where were we? Law school. They always say your first exam will test you as to whether or not you can survive. And believe me, it was full of Yale undergrads, Harvard undergrads, Ivy League undergrads. All the best people tried to get into Michigan Law School. It was prominent, like Harvard, Yale, law schools, some Stanford. I said, wow, I'm going to flunk out of this place. The first exam comes. It's on personal property. I know you're not greatly interested in this, but we'll take you through what it's like. They set out the facts for you. Professor Smith, I still remember his name. A woman is flying in an airplane. She's playing with her ring, and it falls. On the ground, there's a farmer who owns the land and a hunter trespasser who's walking the land. Question. And in law, there are no answers, but at least write your analysis. Make your arguments for who the ring belongs to. So I'm writing away, just regurgitating all I know. Because I was a serious student. I mean, I worked hard. Lived in a Presbyterian church as the sexton, free. I'm not going to tell you what goes on in Presbyterian churches in a college after hours. Forget it. Let's just say that the facilities are used because there was a sorority right next door. And where would those girls go to take their boyfriends to have some privacy? I had my hands full just keeping the trespassers out. Anyway, back to my law school exam. So it could either be the lady who dropped the ring, the landowner, or the hunter trespasser. Takes 2 weeks for the professor to grade the blue books. He comes back. There's 150 of us in the room. Gentlemen, this is bad news. I'm very reluctant to give this, but only 2 people were good enough to pass the exam. Mr. Allen, Allen, and Mr. Ellsman. I said, son of a gun, I've made it. And then the professor goes on to say, but in real life law practice, you all would have lost the case and flunked out because you all assumed ASSUME made an ass out of you and me, that the ring that the lady dropped was the same ring found on the ground. I'm still beating myself over that. I did not raise that question. Like if I'd started my answers assuming that the ring found on the ground was the same ring dropped by the lady flying in the airplane. Don't make assumptions in life. You get in a lot of trouble. Anyway, I went on to be a great scholar at the law school, and I was the highest paid in my graduation class. And I got married to this wonderful woman I'm still married to. And if anybody tells you that every day in marriage is happiness, don't have anything more to do with them. We have 2 children together. And I was the highest paid in my graduating class because I went with Chrysler Corporation in the legal department. I needed the money, man. I sound like President Biden. Man. I'm not telling you how much. Let's just say it was $300 a year more than Wall Street was paying lawyers. It was big money. I mean, I could support my family. So I took that job, learned a lot about big corporations. They have some nice people in them, but everybody's trying to dodge responsibility and blame it on the legal department. So they were always up in my office, even though I was a young know-nothing. At least I had an office. Biggest case I had, Chrysler paid $200 million. At that time, that was a lot of money. To buy a company called Simca, a French automaker. We bought bearer shares, which means that you don't know who owns them. If they're produced physically, that's ownership. So $200 million was a lot of money, and the United States, as even today, had balance of payments problems. And so the boss of the legal department, vice president of legal affairs, his name was David Kendall. He'd just come out of the Eisenhower administration, where he was assistant secretary of the Treasury. So I had to tell Mr. Kendall, I didn't call him David, Mr. Kendall, I'm giving legal approval to the purchase of Simca, and it's going to take $200 million flowing from this side of the Atlantic over to France and Geneva, where the shares were. He said to his secretary, I forgot her name, "Secretary, get Doug on the phone." I didn't know what he was talking about. "Dave, Doug, we're putting $200 million into a French auto company." I'm just sitting there. They talk a little bit. He kind of shoos me out of the room. Then he calls me back in. "You know who that was, Jim?" "Doug Dillon, Secretary of the Treasury." That's the highest I ever got in my job. And I never seen numbers like that in my private practice. Anyway, I wrote an article for the American Bar Association Journal, which is like the pinnacle of publications in legal practice. The American Bar Association is the leading association. I got an article published on doing international business, and I busted out of Chrysler Legal to start my own law firm. Just rented a little T-suite down in the Guardian building of Detroit, and I didn't have any clients. My buddies in the legal department at Chrysler said, we'll refer action to you. Well, that didn't happen for a couple of months, but they did give me some referrals. And that article in the ABA helped a little bit. And slowly, I built up a law firm of 15. That's a big firm. That's lawyers, 15 lawyers. And had to pay all the legal secretaries, half of whom came from Canada because Detroit's right on the river. Detroit River. Windsor is closer than going to another suburb in the Detroit burbs. It's just right across the river. And I'm in Canada. We have a bridge. We have a tunnel. Actually, we have two bridges, and we're building another one called the Gordie Howe Bridge. And that's named after a famous hockey player. Like most hockey players, he came from Canada and became a Red Wing star. Okay, so I built up my law firm, generally representing corporations, banks. Big shot. I wasn't happy. I was happy because it was a success, but I wanted to serve people. And the only way I could do that was to establish myself in the burbs and do class actions on behalf of many clients. And that's what I did, as my family was also building. A son and a daughter, wonderful kids, and very successful in their own spheres. My son was interested in landscape architecture. He went to Michigan State. My daughter was interested in business. Yeah, not many women were interested in business. She got an MBA from the University of Michigan after Michigan undergrad. Married her high school prom date. Never dated any other boys. Everybody's happy in the family. Each of my children have 3 kids. And they live literally next door to each other in a suburb of Chicago. And their children socialize with each other because they're close in age. My wife was a clinical psychologist. She has a master's in psychology. So a lot of my buddies are afraid of her. You mentioned psychologists, and everybody thinks you know a lot and thinks that you're analyzing them when you go out to dinner with them or go to a party with them or whatever. And she is good. So it's always interesting to talk to her about how she feels about somebody else. So she did the down and dirty stuff. She dealt with divorce cases and depression, children that weren't responding well. She likes children in the practice of psychology because you can change them. Adults, not so good. And it's hard to chip away at what's wrong with them. So now I'm 85 and I'm still practicing law. As I say, practicing, because I don't have it down yet. Believe me, there's so much to know that I don't have any preachment about my competence. Yeah, I've been to Harvard, I've been to Michigan Law. I've seen a lot in 85 years, but every case is new and exciting. And I'd rather give a lot of my time to Jesus. So that's about enough. And we'll be back with programs on the Bible and theology and a lot of fancy words. Epistemology. Oh, I don't want to impress you with Harvard words. God bless you all. That's my biography. I don't know if I told the truth, but I can't remember any lies. Blessings.